but I had to mention what TV Land's doing, and we'll get there in a second. But we're talking about the 14th Amendment was designed essentially to say all those freed slaves, all those people that just a little while ago you considered property, you have to treat equally under the law. That's what the 14th Amendment was for. It established, at least in part, the definition of what's actually required to be considered a natural-born citizen of the country. Which, if you take just the 14th Amendment alone, it's quite clear that there's no such thing as an anchor baby. If an illegal crosses the border, has a baby here, citizenship should not be automatically bestowed upon the child based on the 14th Amendment. Now, we've had the discussions on the show before with some constitutional lawyers, and on one occasion, just a very bright, self-educated individual who studied law, who read case law, and it does come down to case law. There's not a specific law in place, but there is precedent involved where they decide, oh, guess what? We're just going to go ahead and say if you're born here, you're automatically a citizen. But it has nothing to do with the Constitution. The Constitution's definition of natural-born citizenship clearly states the opposite. Well, the parents, or at least one parent, must be subject to the jurisdiction in which the child's born. If you're in the country illegally, you're not actually subject to the jurisdiction. Excuse me. Not in the truest sense of the word. It doesn't mean that you don't have to be a citizen yourself, but you have to be here legally. Yeah, that's basically all that comes down to. And, I'm getting off topic here. So we're going to try and reel it back. But the bottom line is, the 14th Amendment, the idea of equal protection under the law, actually was not being violated. Because here's the thing. In order for there to be a violation by denying same-sex marriage, that would mean there would have to be some constitutional requirement bestowing marriage on heterosexual couples. And, I've looked again. There is no such animal. There is no constitutional right to marriage for anybody. The framers never imagined government would get itself involved in marriage. It's a religious thing. It's a spiritual thing. And even for those who are not particularly religious, whether it be agnostic or flat-out atheist, there's still a spiritual context in the connection between you and your chosen partner. The state, the government, little s state, I should say, has no business and no authority over that. In fact, the very notion that you require a license to get married is still a throwback to the very thing that you're trying to move past, right? Discrimination? Marriage licenses were a precept of democratically controlled southern states that were trying to prevent mixed-race couples from getting married. That's where all that came from. So now you're demanding to have an acknowledgement that previously has all its roots in discrimination. It has all of its roots in a level of institutionalized racism. And that is a little ironic, if not outright ridiculous, I think. I mean, I tend to think it's pretty ridiculous, but where people continue to get confused is they seem to think, oh, well, there is this right. The whole concept of marriage licenses did make its way to the Supreme Court back in the day, and it was deemed constitutional only because the federal government has no authority over marriage. It was a state's issue. They didn't actually say it's constitutional. They said, not our jurisdiction. Which is exactly why the appropriate finding in this particular case would have been, we're booting you out, it's a state issue. People want to say, oh, it's still discrimination. It's not discrimination legally if equal protection is in play. You have to look on a state-by-state basis. The state passes a law. You don't like it? That doesn't make it discriminatory. I'll tell you what discrimination is. Some of this pushback, and we're going to see a lot of. A gentleman like a hardware and roof supply company owner in Tennessee, of all places, not far from Knoxville actually, put up a sign and made USA Today and made its way around social media to a degree too. Gays not allowed. He doesn't want them coming in his store. Now, there's a lot of anger. And I can understand anger and I can understand lashing out. There is a difference between standing on principle and just lashing out in anger. This is just lashing out in anger, and it really doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the cause. It doesn't help yourself. It's wrong. The guy is supposed to be a pastor, from what I read. The answer here is to embrace the people and help them to understand why we have the issue. But this kind of activity is going to get worse. It's going to get worse because of this victory lap. I already mentioned the White House with the rainbow colors. We actually talked about that earlier in the week. We've seen these gay pride parades where pastors who were nearby have been assaulted, been spit on. Some of the people in some of these floats have dressed themselves up like Jesus and made out with one another. I saw pictures of a couple of lesbians that were topless. Of course, you know, they had the little black bar across, so there was nothing pornographic involved with the photo. But if you had been there in person, you would have seen it. Saw pictures of two lesbians doing it, saw pictures of several gay men doing it. Sometimes both men were dressed like Jesus, sometimes only one of them was, and the other was dressed like an escapee from the Village People. But a multitude of pictures. And you've got to understand, this type of mockery, I saw just before I came on and started broadcasting where several gay rights activists who came to visit the White House were taking selfies of themselves flipping off the Ronald Reagan portrait. What is the deal with this? You won, supposedly. But you see, that's just it. Like I said, instinctively, they know this fight isn't over. So their point now is to try and beat everybody down so that by the time there's a realistic chance of bringing this in front of a different court with perhaps more traditional justices, and you know, so I say traditional. I didn't say conservative, I didn't say progressive, I said traditional, because traditionally speaking, at least before the 1960s, the Supreme Court justices put their political ideologies and philosophies aside when it came to putting on the robes and sitting in that courtroom. There were some horrible people. There were some Supreme Court justices. Terrible people. But they still took the Constitution and the role in preserving it seriously enough that they didn't let their politics get in the way of their duty to the public. We don't have that now. We have activist judges. If we can get some more traditional judges in place, then this ruling very well could make its way back to the Supreme Court and be challenged, and could very well find itself overturned, again, based on the fact that this was never something that should have been in the federal courts in the first place, because they have no jurisdiction over marriage. Period. It's not discriminatory if everyone's being treated the same. And the legal definition of being treated the same is everyone within the state that you're living in abides by the same law. Everyone under the Constitution is dealing with whatever's permitted. If you are a same-sex couple and you want to get married, you had 37 states to choose from that you could have went to. 37 states. So you had a choice. Continue to work towards convincing the people in your state to change their minds, which over the course of the last 20 years, you literally went from 0 states to 37 states. Continue to work in your state to try and change everybody's mind to at least accept it enough that you're not going to have this anger and vitriol. Or just move to a different state, one that already accepts it. Problem solved either way, and you'd probably be happier someplace where you felt more accepted. Now, those of you who will stand up and say, I shouldn't have to move. Well, you're right, you shouldn't have to. And you don't have to. But you don't have the right to force anything about you on someone else. Your rights literally end where the next person's rights begin. People have a right to be unpleasant. People have a right to be offensive. People have a right to hang up a no gays allowed in their private property, even if it's a private business. Is it appropriate? No. Are there some local ordinances against it? There may very well be. Should there be is a totally different question. But that is a knee-jerk reaction to all this flaunted, in-your-face victory lap crap when you got a lot of people that already were disappointed in the ruling because of one reason or another. My disappointment comes from the fact that you literally suspended the Constitution to get to that ruling. Others, based solely on honest, conscientious faith in the Christian teachings, find themselves feeling like all of a sudden they're no longer anything other than an outcast in their home world. Here we are in our homeland. This is the land of opportunity. This is the land of freedom of religion. And suddenly it is the land of your freedom of religion is meaningless because you don't have the freedom to practice it according to your conscience. Nor the way it's being laid out, according to the occupier, it's up to him and all his progressive pals to go around and help those poor Bible-thumping, gun-toting, hard-case, southern, uneducated folks, just to help them realize that the time has come. All of us down here in Tennessee and other parts around the country that we're still clinging to our Bibles and our guns, we've got to learn to get with the progressive program. We've got to learn that, we don't have the right to believe in the things that are in our Bible. Now, granted, that pesky Constitution tells us we do, but what does it know? It tells us we've got the right to bear arms, too. The progressives, they don't like that either. Alan West put forth an excellent point in talking about this decision, because the decision basically comes down to the fact that where rights are granted, where there is a precondition of a right, which is, that's terrible doublespeak, and it's not accurate anyway. The way the Constitution is written up, and you people have to understand, you may not like the Constitution, but the Constitution still works for you if you let it. It works for everyone, for everyone's benefit, because it's concerned about protecting your liberty, your freedoms, your right to choose, your right to be free. The Constitution is not written in a fashion that it grants you rights. It's not written in a fashion that says the government is to grant you rights. It's written under the basis and the assumption that your rights come from